Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm coming to you a little bit early with these Zoom meetings as our first actual dedicated episode one is starting out this Saturday at 9:41 in the morning. And we're going to be bringing on guest speaker Don Campbell with Trust Roofing. So today, before this storm hits, as most of you probably know, that there is a hurricane that's out in the Gulf right now. It's going to be sweeping by the west coast of Florida, a little too close for comfort, given that the last hurricane that we had actually wasn't a hurricane at all. It was actually a tropical storm and it ended up flooding a lot of our areas. So what I want to do today is bring on such a value member of our team, but not necessarily our real estate team, our A team that we bring to the table whenever we have buyers or sellers sometimes. So with this in mind, I have Julia Dees with Dees Insurance, who's going to be joining us here shortly. And just to welcome you all here to this channel, to my show, if you will. I'm Kelly.Fullick. I work for Keller Williams on Team Sarasota Home Specialists, and I'm going to be bringing you all kinds of expertise, knowledge about the area, knowledge about our local real estate market as well, of what's happening in our real estate market, and always having a guest speaker right around the corner that's going to be able to give additional value in areas that are not my level of expertise. Because what I like to do is I like to do what I do best. I like to hire out the rest. This is something that's worked for me in my business for a very long time. So without further ado, we have Miss Julia Dees is just signing on now. We're waiting for her to connect. And here we go. Hi, Julia. Welcome. Good morning. How are you doing? I've got you on mute, darling. Let me unmute you. There you are. Oh shit, you're still muted. Let's see. That's for me. Dang it. I knew there's always, oh, wait. Oh, there you are. Yes. Perfect. So I've gone ahead, spent like a solid minute before you joined to introduce myself, and just let everyone know that, you're part of my A team. And while you're not necessarily a realtor within our team, you are part of our A team that always comes together to help all of our buyers in getting everybody with home insurance. And yeah, so I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time, for your dedication, and to your knowledge in the field, and always, hosting classes for us that helps us educate us so that we can educate our clients as well. So
absolutely. It takes a team. It takes a village, as they say, right?
It sure does. It sure does. So just to get started here, and I do have a couple of questions because, I didn't want this to just kind of be strung out there in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
But a couple of questions for you, just because we do have a storm that's headed our way right off the coast of Florida. I don't know if it's going to hit, but can you tell us, as of right now, if somebody doesn't have their insurance bound, or maybe they haven't added flood, or maybe they're renting right now and they saw what happened with the last tropical storm that came through, and they're like, hey, we don't want to risk any flood, so maybe we should get some renter's insurance to protect our things. What does that look like right now? Is that still a possibility for people?
So in reference to this specific storm that we're talking about, that we're soon to be seeing where it goes here shortly, right now it's very, very limited, if at all, if that is a possibility. But I do want to speak more in the broader context, because some of your viewers might be looking at this post this specific storm. So a couple of things I think are really important to note when it comes to hurricanes or storms are a few different things. Number one, it's very important to, if you are in the middle of working with Kelly and you're trying to buy a house, it's really important to get insurance bound as soon as possible. And I think a lot of people maybe are a little bit hesitant to doing that, because they think, well, what if things change? What if my closing date changes or whatnot? That's so simple. We can move that back and forth. But once you bind the policy, it kind of locks you into not only the rate that you've agreed upon, but also to having the coverage, meaning that in the event of a storm or a hurricane where companies do actually shut down, you could still potentially, assuming that your title agency or attorney are open, you could actually close in the middle of a hurricane. With
Oh,
that
very
said,
cool. Okay.
yeah. And with
Okay.
that said, when I mentioned about storms or companies or carriers shutting down, what I mean by that is basically they put restrictions on different risks. So of course we look at each individual property as its own risk and they rate that accordingly. But when it comes to these storms, when you're seeing that, oh my gosh, there's a potential for a claim going to happen anytime soon, they want to mitigate that risk as much as possible by not binding any new policies until they have an understanding of what the house actually looks like and what condition it's in, so they can rate it appropriately. So they'll actually restrict binding of new policies. And how that looks is really determined by the individual carrier. So that individual carrier is going to say, all right, for us, we're going to restrict these couple zip codes or this coast, or we're going to only not allow for coastal properties or whatever it is. They can choose what they're going to restrict in their moratorium. However, it oftentimes starts small and then goes up and eventually to the entire state gets restricted, and not only on writing new business, but also making any changes to existing policies. So when you talked about in those instances, what if somebody wants to add coverage to their policy or make certain changes that ultimately are going to affect premium, like adding coverage, changing deductibles, those types of things really get restricted as well. And again, typically, once one carrier does it, we start to see the others kind of follow suit from there. So there are small windows when one carrier maybe shuts down options, that there might be some others that are open that we can go ahead and get things bound. However, typically by the next day or so, you're going to start to see it become more and more restrictive.
Got it. Okay. So what does it mean? What does a standard home insurance policy normally cover and what's normally excluded with that?
So the standard home insurance policy is going to cover anything, the repairing and replacing of the actual structure and the contents inside. And again, these are broad statements because
Yes.
of course, each individual policy, you can cater towards your needs and wants. However, typically what we see in Florida for homeowners is that they're covering the exterior, they're covering any detached structures, they're covering any of their contents within the home. And also it has additional coverages that extend past that, such as liability. So if somebody's going to come sue you, it'll cover that. Or even if there were, unfortunately, in the event of a claim and your house were to be totally uninhabitable, there are coverages within it that allow for you to have, it's called loss of use, where you get an opportunity to have some money to live somewhere else while your home's being repaired. So that is what's covered in it. Typically, most policies will have what we call hurricane coverage. You can get an X-wind coverage policy, which means it does not include hurricane. But separate from a home insurance policy is going to be the flood insurance. And that's really where I think people don't recognize it, especially those coming from out of state, is that one, hurricane coverage is included in the home insurance typically, and flood insurance is not. But the last thing that's really important just to show for your viewers what is not covered in home insurance is wear and tear. And where this really comes into play is when we're looking at roofs. That's a big budget item that people really just don't enjoy spending money to replace,
Okay.
unless there's something that physically caused the damage to the roof and requiring it to be replaced. It's not going to be covered in your home insurance policy. And the best way I like to look at it is, I think everybody pretty much understands how auto insurance works. If you've got bald tires, you're not putting an auto insurance claim in, you're just going to have to bite the bullet and go out there and get new tires. It sucks, but nobody gets to see the fancy money that you spent, but you just got to do it.
It's definitely not the sexiest purchase that we make as adults, but it is so
Exactly.
necessary. And I absolutely love that analogy and started using that with my buyers as well, to just explain, like, look, it's deferred maintenance. You have to do it. It's something that you just have to keep up with. And luckily we only do this once, usually every 15 to 20 years, depending on your roof,
Right.
which is another question that I'm going to bring up. I know the answer to this, but I want you to dive in on this one as well. When I go under contract with someone and I have an original roof and the property is at least 15 to 20 years old,
Mhm.
and I'm getting into the property, we're getting into inspections, we're doing all the things. Now I know what I'm looking for. Tell me what we're looking for though. I'm gonna let you take over for this one.
Yeah, sure. So that is a big hot button item right now with insurance because the past number of years we've had some fraud associated with it. So what insurance carriers decided to do was to kind of, tighten down the hatches and say, all right, we're going to be really picky when it comes to roofs. So what that means is when you're talking about original roofs or homes that are a certain year age, it doesn't matter as much specifically to that other than knowing that you might be close to needing to replace it. And what I mean by that is for insurance carriers, they're going to require you to show that there's at least 5 years of remaining useful life left on the roof. And that will typically be seen on a 4-point inspection. So if there is typically inspectors will usually assess maybe a shingle roof at around a 15-year-old time frame. So if you've got a 15-year-old shingle roof, you're probably at the point where it's going to need to be replaced when you're looking at that house. Or if you've got even a shingle roof that may be showing it's 10 years old, you're looking at maybe getting a little bit narrow on that window to meet those requirements. And this is across the board. This is even to a state-backed insurance carrier called Citizens, where they typically are supposed to be the insurer of last resort. They still require a 5-year minimum useful life on it. So that's really something to kind of consider. And again, it's based on what the inspector puts on that 4 points. So typically they look at 15-year for shingle, 30-year for tile, and then maybe around, between 40 and 50 for metal. But they'll look at the condition of the roof and they'll assess how many years of remaining useful life there's on it. And then we go based off of that number.
Yes. And to piggyback off of that as well, I do want to highlight how wonderful it is working with Julia with Dees Insurance, because not only do they keep us top of mind and super well educated in the field, cracked tiles on a tile roof have previously always been known to be a cosmetic defect. And while the aesthetic value of the tile roof is purely aesthetic, it's the underlayment that really matters. Having a cracked tile on your roof can actually now impede your ability to get your home insured. So that's just another wonderful tip that we got from Julia. Gives me ammo for my clients when wanting to get the best for them. So if we have a tile roof and there's multiple cracked tiles, which is pretty normal to find here you go. A lot of agents still don't know about this. A lot of agents will still fight me behind the scenes when we're negotiating and not willing or wanting to do that. Working with this lady right here, though, she gives me the ammo that I need. She sends me a letter and lets me know, coming directly from the insurance agency, that we cannot get that bound if they don't repair those cracked tiles or replace them. So thank you so much, Julia, for all of your help and helping me
Yeah.
stay educated and top of mind and all of those things. So tell me, what is and I know that this is a big reason why a lot of people feel the fear of moving to Florida.
Mhm.
And I know you've touched on this recently in a video as well. What is a typical insurance quote that you're getting? Because I know a lot of people, you said, I think is like $5,000-6,000 annually. Can you touch on that and talk about?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. And honestly, it's like the $1,000,000 question because each individual risk is rated individually. It's hard to give that overarching number. However, what I do see though is in the media, and I've seen everything ranging from $6,000 a year to $11,000 a year being an average. What we have to remember about Florida is, although it is a high risk state, it's high risk across the entire state. It's nothing that's necessarily unique to this area. However, one thing that is really important is that we also recognize that there's ultra high risk areas and there's ultra high value areas. Those things tend to skew that metric. And so I've always said I would love to see the data on not the median. I don't want to see the average or not the mean. I would like to see the median. I'd like to see what that middle number looks like. And we did a fun little Instagram reel recently where for the day I took 32 policies only because I didn't want to bore everybody with listing out so many different policies. It would have lasted for too long. But I took 32 because it fit with the music. It felt long enough. And what we saw was not even one of those hit that average of 6,000. I think the highest in that video was maybe 4, but they can be anywhere, ranging from we've seen home insurance policies under $1,000 to obviously all the way up, but our 32 policies, we didn't even get close to what the media is showing as the average rate. And I just think that that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So talking about different flood coverages, and I know that I've brought this up a couple of times. I always bring this up when I'm working with someone. When I have a buyer and they're like, we do not want to be in a flood zone, I let them know, then you should not be buying in Florida, because all of Florida is considered a flood zone. There's just most likely to flood versus least likely to flood.
Right.
So in the times where you have someone that has an insurance policy that's put into place, talk to me about, and again, I feel like I know a lot of these answers, but I want to educate my audience here. Talk to me about what happens when we purchase a home and we have some act of God that takes over, and I'm filing a claim with the insurance companies, but they won't go through with it. They're denying my claim because of XYZ that happened before I purchased.
Yeah, so there's a few different things I think are really important to touch on when it comes to flood insurance. Number one, like you said, Kelly, everybody in the state of Florida is in a flood zone. So when you see somebody that's maybe in what's called an X zone, it's a lower risk zone, it's very often referred to as a no flood zone. I think most of that came about because it is not a requirement by the lender typically if you are in an X zone to carry it. So that's where I think maybe that word no came into play. I don't really know. However, there are some changes that we have seen with flood. There's a few of them are, now there are X zones that are required to carry it based off of the carrying company for the home insurance, meaning carrier like Citizens. We've had new regulations that have come down showing that it's going to happen all the way up to January 2027. Where every single Citizens policy will be required to carry a flood insurance, whether you paid cash, whether you have a mortgage, whether it's required or not. So that's something that's really important to think about, or to at least know. And then the second thing would be when we talk about these flood zones, typically there's two different routes you can go for flood insurance. One is through the National Flood Insurance Program, also known as the NFIP, or through FEMA. Those flood policies are going to be very by the book on how they do them. And so typically what happens is, unless you bind it right when you get it, right when you're buying the house, you typically have a 30-day wait period. So even when we're talking about this storm, if somebody calls and says, hey, I'd like it, even if they were open to binding, we still have to wait 30 days. So there's a restriction when it comes to that. And then the second option is private flood. And with private flood, it's like a private carrier where they kind of have the ability to underwrite things and determine what the rate is and if they want the risk. And with that, it also allows it for some smaller or shorter wait periods, or even none at all. But what's really important to realize in the FEMA flood policies is that no longer are the zones dictating the rate. And I think that's really important because the vast majority of flood policies are still going through FEMA and through the NFIP program. And it doesn't matter what zone you're in. The rate is the rate based off your house and the individual risk that's assessed through their algorithms that they determine. But it doesn't matter if you've been remapped or rezoned, the rate is the rate for them. It does matter a little bit on the private market side of things, just because they are in control of their, how they analyze the risk. But like I said, typically that when we're talking flood, most people are going with the NFIP or FEMA option.
The FEMA option. Okay. All right. And tell me, like, can you walk me through real quick on like how the claim filing actually works if I were to go and file a claim after the storm?
Sure. Typically it's very advisable to call your agent, because for one, you want to know what your deductibles are. Even if you see them on paper, you want to have an understanding is this going to be covered? Typically, when we talk about storm claims, these act of God claims, they don't count against you, which I know everyone has kind of heard this and are worried about it a little bit. So they don't count against you, meaning that you're not going to see an increased rate because of a claim being filed. But when we're talking about any of these all other perils, so outside of storm claims, it's really advisable to contact your agent to see, what my deductibles are, do I even have coverage for this? Because even if you file a claim and it's something that you decide later on, you know what, I just want to close it out, I'm going to take zero balance, it still shows in your claims history and it can still count negatively against you from the standpoint of some carriers just have a, I want zero claims history rule. So that wouldn't even be an option for you to get a quote further on. So definitely, obviously knowing what's covered in your policy and what's not, understanding your deductibles, contacting your agent. A lot of times we can go ahead and file the claim on your behalf, especially when we come to these big catastrophic storms. But you're going to always end up talking to the company carrier itself because they're going to have a desk adjuster. They're going to have somebody come out and analyze things in the field called a field adjuster. They're going to report that back to the claims adjuster where they're going to determine, does it meet the coverage requirements? You know, how much was the damage? And then they're going to kind of work on it as far as getting you the replacement that you need.
How quickly do claim adjusters come out to the property after you file?
So it depends on the situation. Obviously, when we have,
Okay.
and the reason why I say that,
Accessibility being one of them, maybe?
sure. I mean, a typical claim, it's a fairly quick process. Usually they try to get somebody out there within the next day. Every individual carrier has their own claims process and what they follow and what they do. So I don't want to just quote one and then you have another carrier that maybe has a 2-day or a week process. It just depends on the carrier. However, when we talk about these major catastrophic claims where you've got you know, a lot of people, multiple areas, multiple cities that are affected, obviously there's only so much manpower, so it can kind of slow down the process. However, what's really important for us as agents is understanding what that catastrophic claims process looks like for these carriers so that we can advise the client on what they're going to expect. Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people just want to have an understanding of when am I expecting to have this resolved versus having, you know, everyone wants it done immediately, of course, but if I tell you I'm going to be there in 2 days and I'm not, that's a problem versus me telling you I'm going to be there in 3 days and I got there in 2. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of piggyback off on the other topics before we started getting into like actual storm and policies and all of that stuff, are there, tell me about how I can get my insurance as low as possible? Like what discounts are available for me?
So the first thing I'm going to recommend is the farther from the coast and the newer the home, that's going to give you the most optimal premium when it comes to, you know, getting home insurance in Florida. And that's just because, as you can expect, that risk is just lower. The carriers like to see something up to code, new, you know, with no risk. Obviously, no claims history is a great thing to have as an individual, whether you had a claim on something from your house up north or not. It still all populates for you and goes into your rate. But as far as other discounts and things, I think a big one that we hear a lot of times in the state of Florida is I'm getting hurricane impact windows. And although that is great, I will be the first to tell you as an insurance agent that do that for your safety, not for, or even just for the comfort of being in your home during something that's happening versus for the discount on the insurance policy. And the reason for that is because the cost to put that in versus the savings on the policy are vastly different. And what I mean by that is the discount on that policy, which would be found in a wind mitigation inspection, is going to be basically a yes or no answer. It's going to be, is there opening protection? And I think a lot of people focus on the windows, but opening protection has to include every opening to the home. So we're talking garage doors, skylights, front doors, sliders, glass block, the door that's in the garage that goes to outside. Everything has to be impact rated for you to get that check mark for that discount. So if you're just replacing windows, that's great. But if there's still ways that you can have that wind impact in other areas of the home, you're not going to get the discount. So, and I people always want to hear real hardcore numbers, and I hate to throw them out because they change and it's so individualized.
Of course.
But for your viewers, let me at least give some sort of guidance to replace every window, door, you know, every opening to the home to get you to that impact rated. And again, it doesn't even have to be impact rated glass. It can be shutters. They're the same exact discount, but we're talking of tens of thousands of dollars to do this, right? And maybe on average, an average home, you might save maybe around $1,000 a year.
Okay.
It's going to take you a very long time to recoup that money from a discount perspective. Versus
Okay.
the discount that we see have a major impact really quickly is some of the older homes before the new codes show that you had to have the hurricane clips with a certain number of nails in them were just like in my own home, we had every other truss had nails in it. They just at the time, my house is 1953. At the time, they felt like that's gonna hold your roof on. And now they said, no, it's not. And similar to that, even the every other truss that has the nails on it, it only has 2 nails in it, where the code now says 3 nails is where it's at. So if I went retrofitted a 3rd nail into my trusses with the 2 nails, and then I put 3 nails and the clip on the other trusses that have nothing, I would then bring that up to code when it comes to that standpoint. And so therefore I might spend maybe, let's say $1,500 to do that retrofit on my roof, but I might save again like $1,000 a year. You can see within a year or 2 years, I've already made that money back, and every year going forward, I'm going to have that discount automatically applied to the policy.
Perfect. Now for our last and final and fun question.
Yes.
What do you have prepared for this storm? Are you preparing for this storm?
So it's very funny because I think it's kind of like the way you look at doctors and nurses in the hospital. It's like, oh, are you worried about, they're like, no, I can't. I'm worried about other people. That's kind of the way it is. So our
Yeah.
preparation always has to do with the office, not guarding it from rain and wind damage. We've always have the 2 internet providers. So we have a backup. We always have like a plan for our team, what that looks like. It's really more or less to protect our clients. And I'll be the first to tell you that at our own home, we are one of the last people ever to clean up, debris that's around our house. Our house looks like it's been abandoned by the time everyone's next day sweeping stuff up, putting it by the curb. We always miss the pickup day where you pick up all the big, branches and stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's just because we're always so focused on being here at the office to be there for the clients, because it's not about selling policies, it's about being there when these things happen for our clients.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Julia. This has been wonderful chatting with you as always. And, just always such a wonderful sport. Always, willing to pitch in when asked. And, I didn't have to pull a gun to your head, which is really nice.
I like to do it because there's very few agents, I will say this to your viewers, there's very few agents like Kelly that really truly want to understand to better represent her buyers and sellers. And so for that, I love working with you, Kelly, and your entire team, because you really go the extra mile in order to do that for your clients. And so I'm always happy to participate any way that I can.
Thank you so much. She has come through so many times where I just have like a really quick question. I just text it over to her real quick. And I swear to God, no matter how busy she is, she usually always gets back to me within the hour and is always so helpful. So thank you. You could not have been a more perfect candidate for this. So I appreciate your time, your expertise, all your knowledge, all of your experience, everything that you provide for, our whole area. So thank you. I
Thanks,
appreciate this.
Kelly. I
And we'll be
appreciate
in
it.
touch.
All
All right.
right, bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.